The public has not yet received a coherent explanation as to why people stopped flying to the moon. The lunar programs, which were developed by both the Americans and the Soviet Union, were closed in the early 70s. If the Soviet Union, after the first successful flight to the moon of American spacecraft Apollo 11, simply admitted its defeat in this fundamental race, the Americans abandoned further flights rather unexpectedly and abruptly and brushed aside all questions quite primitively, as if they did not see any significant scientific value in lunar missions in order to spend such a huge amount of money from the budget on them. But then why people do not even plan to fly to the moon now? Because the technology has advanced so much that Elon Musk is planning a manned mission to Mars with a landing on the surface in 2025 under his program. There is even a theory that no lunar mission actually took place and that it is all a global hoax, but this topic deserves a separate video. Enthusiasts are still arguing about what NASA managed to find on the moon, so that they had to abandon further flights. But first things first. As you have already understood, after the Great Gagarin flight, the Americans wanted to rub the Soviet Union's nose in it, and the lunar program was the best way to do it. For 8 years, more than 40,000 NASA employees worked for this super project. Of course, the US government was not stingy with tens of billions of dollars. By that time, Sergei Pavlovich Korolev, the key figure of the whole national cosmonautics, had died, and it is not surprising that the Soviet moon exploration project started to lag behind the American one more and finally came to a standstill. What about the Americans? In December 1968, the Apollo 8 crew circumnavigated the moon for the first time. Half a year later, on July 2, 1969, the crew of Apollo 11 was the first humans to set foot on the lunar surface. In December 1972, the Americans landed on the moon for the 6th time. And NASA officially planned 3 more expeditions, but something went wrong. These expeditions were hastily canceled, and the lunar program was completely frozen. But why? Let's look into all the oddities in more detail. After the first flights to the moon, people from all corners of the world noticed that something strange was happening on the Earth's satellite. For several years, dozens of astronomers around the world reported seeing many strange and inexplicable things on the moon. From their stories, it became clear that near the surface of the moon, in different places, for a short time there are quite bright flashes, which glow in different shades, differ in size and length, and move in different directions. In addition, enthusiasts have noticed that on the moon can be seen incomprehensible shadows, which are also constantly moving, and the most incredible evidence says that from the surface of the moon take off bright, unidentified objects large enough. They would enter orbit, fly around part of the moon along a chord, and then land again on the surface. Of course, given the cost of the project, NASA could not turn a blind eye to such strange natural anomalies on the moon. By all means, it was necessary to investigate all possible problems before the flight. Therefore, in 1965, there was established an entire scientific society that was engaged in studies of these anomalies, and in 1968, NASA issued a chronological catalog of reports on lunar events. Over the years of research, the total number of strange phenomena reached 500. 79 among them were moving luminous objects, colored elongating trenches, giant domes that changed their color, disappearing craters, geometric figures of different colors, and many more. It is worth noting that geometric figures were mentioned even by the British astronomer William Byrd in 1871 in his own catalogue of the mysteries of the moon, and for example, in 1958 Professor Kozyrev, working at that time in the Pulkovo Observatory, reported that for several hours the central part of the Alphonse crater was covered with a large red cloud. The assumption of volcanic activity was immediately refuted, because similar activity on the moon, according to scientists, ended more than 1 billion years ago. What it was remains unclear, and now the time of the flight has come. Needless to say, almost the whole world was watching the flight of a man to the moon. When the Americans launched the Apollo program with the crew on board, many amateur radio operators followed the course of events all over the world. At the time, there were live broadcasts of the astronauts from the base in Houston, and here many people noticed the unusual messages of the astronauts, who were the first to go to the moon. People could not help noticing the strange intonation and reticence of the astronauts at key moments of the flight, as if the crew deliberately omitted something in the live broadcast. More to come. 10 years after the first lunar mission, a former NASA employee named Maurice Chatelain, who was one of the designers of the radio equipment for the lunar program, published the book Our Ancestors Who Came from Outer Space, in which he claimed to have been present at the communication session. When Neil Armstrong spoke of small objects of unknown origin that he had seen some distance from the Apollo. After that, reports from the moon spoke of some stone blocks that were located near the landing site. And some of them, as another astronaut, Edwin Aldrin, claimed, were emitting a kind of glow from the outside. It was practically colorless and insignificant. Subsequently, such reports refused to comment not only by NASA, but also by the crew. Another thing is that the astronauts could not say anything openly because they signed a non-disclosure agreement. But all this can still be written off as speculation and speculation. There is evidence that Apollo 12, the second expedition to the moon, was accompanied by unidentified flying objects. This fact was established from Earth observatories. 2 UFOs were flying near the U.S. shuttle and flashing their lights. One unidentified flying object of unknown nature was behind the Apollo, and the second was in front of it. It is clear only that Americans by that time obviously knew that there is something incomprehensible and inexplicable on the lunar surface. Perhaps new expeditions were conducted to solve this mystery. And now, let's get to the main point. There are dozens of witnesses, including astronauts, witnesses that NASA simply hushed up the secret information about the lunar mission, deliberately hides the unique photos and films shot on the surface of the Earth's satellite. Here is what one of the key witnesses, Bob Dean, who served on the staff of the Supreme Commander of the NATO Air Force in Europe as an intelligence analyst, has to say. According to the former soldier, most of the footage from the moon landing was routinely destroyed. The NSA specialists left only the footage from the Apollo expedition that could be shown to the public. So now, even if someone wants to conduct their own independent investigation, it will be impossible. According to Bob Dean, the destroyed archives consisted of several thousand individual frames and 40 videos. The reason for this purge was banal and simple. The footage may have been too socially and politically unacceptable, and it is clear that Bob Dean's testimony, without proper documentation, does not count as any concrete evidence. Another thing is that the retired NATO major made a scandalous statement for the sake of the truth and put his reputation on the line. And he was not alone. Another, probably the most important witness in this case, the astronaut of the Apollo 14 crew, Edgar Mitchell, gave many interesting details. He became the 6th man to land on the moon. Mitchell is known for openly claiming the existence of aliens and that they visit our planet, and for confirming the facts of the crash of the UFO in Roswell, among other things. Moreover, he communicated with many witnesses of UFOs, respected military men. There is no doubt in his objectivity, and Mitchell is convinced that aliens are not just visiting the Earth, but have been in contact with the right people for a long time. But back to his statements about the moon mission. In all official interviews, Mitchell elegantly evades direct statements, because Mitchell, like the other astronauts, signed a non-disclosure statement. Another thing is that according to journalists, in confidential interviews Mitchell stated that, like other astronauts, he personally saw objects of unknown nature on the moon, about which he cannot speak openly. But that is not all. Former American astronaut William Rutledge, who was supposed to be part of the Apollo 20 expedition, made a truly fantastic statement. Allegedly, the last 3 expeditions that were frozen by the NASA after 1972 actually took place and were conducted in strict secrecy. Rutledge, who had just participated in the secret Apollo 20 expedition, said that they had discovered a huge, cigar-shaped object about 5 kilometers long on the backside of the moon. And this supposed ship had apparently crashed on the moon and had been there for centuries. So why haven't people flown to the moon even after all these years? If we assumed that all 25 astronauts personally saw unidentified objects and unexplained phenomena during the expedition, it could explain a lot. It is quite logical that if NASA specialists discovered such objects on the moon, then they should keep it a secret from the public and come up with any explanations for all strange phenomena in order to conceal the whole truth about the moon. And what was discovered by the Americans on its surface is still impossible to say with certainty. If you liked the video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and write what you think about what really happened. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Your support is very important to me.